Imagine a land where the earth glitters beneath your feet, not with illusion, but with real gold. A place where stories are not written in books but sung through generations, carried in the breath of Griati, the historians of memory. This land was not fantasy, was not myth. It was Mali, a kingdom so powerful, so rich, that its ruler once bent the global economy with a single journey. Welcome to Hidden Kingdoms and Legends, the channel where we uncover the greatness history tried to forget. So much so that centuries later, economic historians still place him at the very top of the list of the richest humans in all of recorded time. While the world often echoes the names of Rome, Persia, or the Ming dynasty, far fewer know the names of Sundiata Keita or Mansa Musa, men whose vision and leadership transformed a region into one of the wealthiest empires the world has ever seen. Today we return to 13th century West Africa, long before colonizers arrived, long before the borders of today's nations were drawn. There existed a realm rooted in trade, faith, knowledge, and unstoppable ambition. Explore the glittering wealth of the King of Kings, walk through the libraries of Timbuktu, and witness the slow unraveling of a giant. From the grassy plains of the Sahel to the scorching sands of the Sahel, the Mali Empire flourished, carving out its place in the world's story through brilliance, resilience, and above all, wealth. Now, wealth in history is often exaggerated. Kings have always enjoyed telling big tales, but Mansa Musa's wealth, it wasn't exaggerated, it was unimaginable. How he used gold not to hoard power, but to build mosques, to elevate scholars, and to preserve knowledge. How a pilgrimage meant to honor his God made the world take notice of a land they had long ignored. It challenges assumptions. It reminds us that greatness isn't limited by geography. That brilliance, innovation, and global impact have always flowed from the African continent long before colonialism tried to silence it. But this story isn't just about riches, it's about legacy. It is about how a man born in the heart of Africa turned his kingdom into a center of faith and learning. And yet how many of us today have even heard of him? The story of Mali is not just a tale of gold and glory, it's a mirror reflecting what the world forgets when it doesn't look closely enough at Africa's past. So buckle up. In this episode we'll travel back in time to meet the Lion King who founded an empire. This is not just a lesson in history, it's a journey through one of humanity's most fascinating, and this is the story of the Mali Empire. And it begins now. Before Mali, there was chaos. The Western Sahel, now known as parts of Mali, Senegal, Guinea, and Mauritania, was once dominated by the powerful Ghana Empire. It was a land of gold and warriors, a hub of trade and pride. But even the strongest empires fade. By the 11th century, Ghana was under pressure from droughts, internal struggles, and invading forces like the Almoravids from North Africa. As Ghana's grip weakened, a power vacuum opened, and from that void a lion was about to rise. His name was Sundiata Keita, prince born into exile, considered weak, even cursed. Stories tell us he was unable to walk as a child, mocked for his condition. But fate had other plans. His enemies underestimated him. His own people had nearly forgotten him, until the day one version of the tale says that young Sundiata, determined to claim his destiny, pulled himself up with a sacred iron rod and stood for the first time. From that moment, the boy no one believed in became a symbol of destiny fulfilled. His mother Sogolan was of noble but mystical lineage. She had fled with Sundiata into hiding when the cruel king Sumanguru Konti of the Soso Empire overthrew Sundiata's homeland. But Sundiata was not content to hide forever. By his late teens, he had gathered warriors from across the world, men who believed in his dream of a unified land. In 1235, at the Battle of Kiri na Sundiata, what happened next echoes in the legend. That Sundiata, using spiritual knowledge and strategic brilliance, defeated the mighty sorcerer king and reclaimed his people's dignity. With this victory, Sundiata founded the Mali Empire. He took the title Mansa, meaning emperor, and began to forge a new identity for his kingdom, not just through war, but through wisdom and structure. He laid the groundwork for a civilization that would last over 400 years. He created an administrative system that blended local autonomy with imperial authority. Rather than ruling with an iron fist, he established a federation of vassal kings, who pledged loyalty to him but retained local control. This was Mali's secret sauce: unity without uniformity. He also convened a Gabara Great Assembly, or council of nobles, warriors, clerics, and historians. Here, laws were passed orally, upheld by griots, trained historians who memorized entire legal codes, genealogies, and events. These griots weren't mere storytellers, they were walking libraries. This wasn't just governance, it was an oral constitution known as the Kurukan Fuga Charter, one of the earliest known declarations of human rights and societal order in the world. Centuries before Western democracies codified equality and justice, Mali was already talking about fairness, responsibility, and the rights of women, elders, and the environment. The Kurukan Fuga emphasized protection of property, respect for women and the elderly, justice through consensus, freedom of movement and trade. This was not a savage land as some would later paint it. It was a sophisticated, structured society led by visionaries. Sundiata understood one thing very well. Wealth builds power, and trade spreads influence. Mali was sitting on literal treasure. The empire encompassed the Bambouk and Bure gold fields, two of the richest sources of gold in the ancient world. At a time when Europe's economy was starved for gold, Mali had it in abundance, but gold alone wasn't enough. Mali's genius was in trade. It controlled major sections of the trans-Saharan trade routes, connecting West Africa to North Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe. Camel caravans, often hundreds strong, carried gold, ivory, and kola nuts northward and returned with salt, cloths, books, and horses. Salt was so valuable it was sometimes traded ounce for ounce with gold. In a land where the Sahara made dehydration a daily enemy, salt wasn't seasoning, it was survival. And so, trade centers like Gao, Jen, and eventually Timbuktu blossomed under Mali's reign. These weren't just marketplaces, they were melting pots of cultures, languages, and ideas. With each trade route, Mali's influence grew. Its gold coins found their way into the pockets of Italian merchants. Its cloth was worn by Berber traders in Morocco. Its horses, imported from the north, galloped into battle to defend and expand the empire's borders. As trade brought goods, it also brought ideas, and one of the most powerful was Islam. Muslim merchants from North Africa didn't just bring salt, they brought the Quran. Sundiata himself is believed to have practiced a form of syncretic religion, blending traditional African spiritual beliefs with Islam. But under his successor, especially by the time of Mansa Musa, Islam became central to the empire's political and cultural life. Mosques were built, Islamic judges, or qadis, were appointed, Arabic literacy spread, and yet, unlike some Islamic empires that enforced strict religious conformity, Mali was relatively tolerant. Traditional religions were not outlawed. Spiritual diversity was woven into the empire's fabric. This religious flexibility helped Mali maintain unity across diverse ethnic and spiritual communities. Mali's army was formidable. Sundiata organized a military system based on clan loyalty. Warriors from allied tribes were integrated into the imperial army, trained in archery, cavalry, and hand-to-hand combat. The empire could mobilize thousands of troops to defend its borders or suppress rebellion. The army also guarded trade caravans, ensuring that merchants could travel safely. In doing so, they protected Mali's economy and reputation as a stable, prosperous empire. Some accounts suggest that under Sundiata and his immediate successor, Mali's army numbered up to 100,000 soldiers, with 10,000 cavalry, one of the most impressive forces of its time. At its height, the Mali Empire stretched over 500,000 square miles from the Atlantic coast deep into the Sahara Desert. It covered modern-day Senegal, the Gambia, Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and parts of Nigeria, Mauritania, and Chad. Its borders were defined less by walls and more by loyalty. Through tribute, trade, and marriage alliances, Mali maintained influence far beyond its capital. When envoys from foreign lands arrived, they were greeted with ceremonies, gold, and a clear message. This was a kingdom of power and pride, and the world began to notice. Beyond wealth, faith, and power, Mali was a cultural beacon, and its soul lived in the Griot was part poet, part historian, musician. He carried the memory of entire dynasties, recounting battles and lineages, songs of praise and cautionary tales. They played instruments like the kora, a 21-stringed harplute, filling royal courts with haunting melodies. They performed at births, weddings, funerals, and coronations, each moment a page in the living history of a people. The Griot tradition ensured that Mali's story, its values, heroes, and lessons would survive even after its cities fell. And it is thanks to these oral historians that we remember Sundiata at all. By the time Sundiata died around 1255, he had laid the foundation of a mighty empire. He was succeeded by his son, and later his grandnephew, Mansa Musa, the man who would elevate Mali from a powerful kingdom into a global wonder. The seed Sundiata planted of unity, wealth, governance, and cultural pride would soon bear fruit in the most spectacular ways. The world had not yet seen the full glory of Mali, but it was coming, and it would change everything. When the dust of caravans settled and the clinking of gold quieted, what remained at the heart of Mali was something even more enduring. Gold may have built the empire's wealth, but it was knowledge that would define its legacy. While many empires focused on conquest, Mansa Musa's vision went deeper. He believed that wealth must be used to elevate the mind, the spirit, and the soul of a people, and that belief gave rise to one of the most extraordinary centers of learning in medieval history. Too many in the modern world, Timbuktu is a metaphor for the ends of the earth. But to scholars of the 14th and 15th centuries, it was the center of the universe. Situated near the Niger River at the edge of the Sahara, Timbuktu was a natural crossroads between North and West Africa. What started as a seasonal camp for nomads eventually blossomed into a thriving metropolis, thanks to its ideal position for trade and learning. Under Mansa Musa and his successors, Timbuktu evolved from a commercial hub into a beacon of Islamic scholarship, law, science, and arts. The city became synonymous with libraries, lecture halls, book markets, and spiritual pursuit. One of Mansa Musa's most remarkable contributions was his investment in a mosque-turned-university that rivaled the finest centers of learning in the Islamic world. With the help of Andalusian architect Abuiz Hafiz Sahih, Sanka was transformed into a grand mosque and school, housing thousands of manuscripts and hosting classes in everything from astronomy to grammar, law, medicine, mathematics, agriculture, and theology. Sanka's educational model was advanced for its time. Students moved through levels of learning based on mastery, not age. They studied under renowned scholars using texts written in Arabic, Ajami, and local dialects. At its height, Sanka University had over 25,000 students, an astonishing number considering the city's population. It was a magnet for scholars across the Islamic world from Morocco, Egypt, and even Spain who journeyed across the desert to sit at the feet of Mali's intellectual giants. This was not a minor African outpost. This was a university city that shaped minds across continents. The most enduring legacy of Timbuktu is its written word. Over 700,000 manuscripts were produced or collected throughout the empire, many of them still preserved today in private libraries and archives, hidden in the attics and trunks of Malian families. These manuscripts covered an extraordinary range of topics: astronomy, with star charts, lunar calendars, and cosmological theories, mathematics, including algebra, geometry, and accounting, medicine detailing herbal remedies, surgical techniques, and anatomical theories, Islamic law, extensive legal documents, judicial rulings, and social ethics, philosophy, essays on morality, governance, and metaphysics, history, chronicles of kings, wars, migrations, and Islamic jurisprudence, poetry and literature, lyrical verses, praise songs, and political satire. One manuscript even includes a recipe for treating malaria using powdered baobab mixed with honey centuries before European medicine reached the continent. In a world where much of Europe was still copying texts by hand in monasteries, Mali had already become a manuscript powerhouse. These books were copied by professional scribes, sold in book markets, and passed down through generations. In medieval Timbuktu, books were more valuable than gold. Mansa Musa's vision made room for thinkers. After his pilgrimage, he invited Islamic scholars to settle in Mali, bringing with them wisdom from Cairo, Fez, Damascus, and beyond. Some of the most prominent scholars included Ahmed Baba al-Timbuktu, known as the Shining Light of the Sudan. Ahmed Baba lived in the late 1500s, after Mansa Musa's time, but was part of the intellectual legacy Musa helped establish. He authored over 40 books on Islamic jurisprudence and grammar, and he possessed a personal library of over 1,600 volumes. Muhammad Bagago, a leading philosopher and teacher at he was known for his ability to interpret complex theological texts and for mentoring many of Timbuktu's greatest minds. Al-Qadi and Izadi chroniclers who recorded the epic histories of Mali and Songhai through works like Tariq al-Fatash and Tari al-Suda. These scholars were not isolated intellectuals. They were influencers of their time, corresponding with leaders across the Islamic world, issuing fatwas, mediating conflicts, and training the next generation of African thinkers. Their legacy is proof that Africa was not a continent waiting for enlightenment, it was already radiating it. What made Mali a scholarly tradition so unique was its ability to blend African culture with Islamic thought. Rather than abandoning their roots, Mali's intellectuals infused Islamic teachings with values, local proverbs, storytelling traditions, and indigenous sciences. Astronomy was taught alongside astrology. Herbal medicine was preserved even as Greek medical texts were translated. This created a distinctly African school of Islamic scholarship, rich, nuanced, and deeply relevant to the people of the Sahel. And unlike the rigid feudalism of medieval Europe, Mali's educational system allowed social mobility. A poor child could study under a scholar, master the Quran, and become a respected judge, imam, or advisor to the emperor. Knowledge in Mali was not hoarded, it was shared. While Mali's cities thrived, so did its global connections. Manuscripts from Timbuktu made their way to Fez, Cairo, Cordoba, and Baghdad. In return, Mali received texts from Andalusia, Persia, and the Ottoman Empire. West Africa was not on the fringe of the intellectual world, it was a key node in the network. Arabic, as the language of learning, helped bridge cultures, but uniquely African interpretations of law, society, and spirituality gave Mali's scholars their distinctive voice in global discourse. While universities like Oxford and Bologna were growing in Europe, Senka Wenjen were already teaching thousands, producing legal opinions, mapping the stars, and arguing ethical theories, and all this. In the 14th century, Mali's intellectual life wasn't just in the lecture halls, it lived in music, art, storytelling, and architecture. The griot tradition continued to flourish, preserving oral history with instruments like the kora and beli. Royal courts were filled not only with advisors and generals, but poets and singers. Praise songs of Mansa Musa and Sundiata were passed down not through ink alone but through generations of memory. Architecture, too, spoke volumes. The Sudano-Sahelian-style mud brick buildings with wooden beams and intricate geometric patterns became the signature of Mali's aesthetic. Mosques weren't just places of worship, they were monuments of identity. In every corner of Mali's cultural life, knowledge was woven in practical, spiritual, artistic, and enduring. Sadly, no golden age lasts forever. After Mansa Musa's death, the scholarly institutions he helped seed would continue to grow, but their protection would wane. By the 15th and 16th centuries, political instability and the rise of rival powers, like the Songhai Empire, would lead to disruptions in Timbuktu's intellectual life. Later in 1591, Moroccan forces invaded Timbuktu, looting libraries and arresting scholars like Ahmed Baba. Though the manuscripts survived in hidden trunks and family collections, many institutions were scattered or shuttered. And as colonialism swept across Africa in later centuries, Timbuktu's brilliance faded from the world, as consciousness often replaced with dismissive myths of backwardness and tribalism. But the knowledge never truly died. It remained buried not in ruins, but in books, memories, and songs. Today, efforts are underway to preserve Mali's manuscript heritage. Local families in Timbuktu continue to protect thousands of ancient books, hiding them from war, extremists, and decay. International organizations have helped digitize over 500,000 manuscripts, making them available to researchers and students worldwide. Malian scholars are reclaiming their own history not just to celebrate the past, but to inspire the future. The world is finally beginning to remember what Mansa Musa saw all along, that Africa was once a continent of thinkers, that the pen, like the sword, can build an empire, and that knowledge, when nurtured, can outlive kings and conquerors. The Mali Empire may have been rich in gold, but its true treasure was the human mind. From the quiet study rooms of Sanka to the bustling book markets of Timbuktu, from griot songs to philosophical debates, Mali built an empire that valued the pursuit of wisdom as much as it valued power. In a world that often forgets, we remember. We remember that Africa has always been a center of learning, that black history is world history, and that long before Oxford, Harvard, or Cambridge, there was Timbuktu, a city of light in the heart of the sand. Every golden empire has its dusk, and though the Mali Empire once shimmered like a jewel in the heart of Africa, it was not immune to the forces that bring down even the mightiest civilizations. Its decline was not sudden but slow, a quiet fading of glory, brought on not by one blow, but by many. And as the gold dust settled, what was once the richest land on earth began to slip into history. When Mansa Musa died around 1337, he left behind an empire at its peak, vast, wealthy, and respected across the known world. But greatness is heavy and hard to carry. His son Mansa Musa inherited the throne, but not his father's vision. Though he maintained stability for a time, the fire of ambition was dimmer. The rulers who followed, some capable, others corrupt or weak, struggled to hold together what Musa had built. One by one, the strong hands of leadership gave way to softer, unprepared fingers. Mali's strength had always come from its federation of loyal provincial chiefs, or minor kings who pledged allegiance to the Mansa Inyani. But that unity was fragile. With no strong central hand to manage tribal politics, internal disputes began to boil over. Governors wanted more independence. Succession crises grew more frequent. Rebellions erupted in key cities, some led by rival clans, others by those who believed they could do better. By the late 14th century, civil wars and infighting became common. What was once a finely tuned machine began to grind under its own weight. And as Mali turned inward, the world around it began to change. While Mali looked to its past, others were looking to the future. To the east, a new power was rising, the Songhai Empire, centered in the city of Gao, which had once been under Mali's control. In the 1430s, Songhai, under the leadership of Soni Ali, began to challenge Mali's authority. He captured territory, disrupted trade routes, and pushed into Mali's eastern provinces. Soni Ali was no ordinary warlord. He was a brilliant tactician, part traditionalist, part reformer. His navy of war canoes and cavalry units swept across the Niger River Valley like wildfire. By the time of Askia Muhammad, Soni Ali's successor, Songhai had become the new superpower of the region, absorbing cities like Timbuktu and Jen, and eclipsing Mali as the new guardian of West African wealth and knowledge. Mali didn't fall all at once. It was dismantled region by region, city by city, by rising competitors with sharper swords and hungrier eyes. Mali's lifeblood had always been its control of the gold-salt trade across the Sahara. But by the 15th century, global trade routes were changing. North African markets began to source gold from other regions. Newly opened Atlantic sea routes diverted European traders away from the old trans-Saharan paths. As Portuguese ships hugged the African coast, they began establishing coastal trade posts, bypassing inland empires like Mali altogether. The desert caravans that once brought salt, silk, and scholars grew smaller. Cities like Walata and Timbuktu lost their economic edge. And with less trade came less revenue, which meant weaker armies, smaller building projects, and fewer resources to hold a crumbling empire together. The gold didn't run out, but the roads to power had shifted, and Mali no longer owned the map. As Mali's borders weakened, foreign threats took notice. To the north, Tuareg raiders, nomadic desert warriors, seized Timbuktu in 1433. These weren't simple bandits. They were militarized clans who understood both desert survival and war strategy. They held Timbuktu for decades, undermining Mali's intellectual and economic stronghold. To the west, the Mossi kingdoms of what is now Burkina Faso began launching repeated attacks into Mali's heartland. To the east, Songhai kept expanding, and in the 1500s, new enemies emerged. Moroccans armed with guns and cannons began eyeing the wealth of West Africa. Though the Moroccan invasion of 1591 happened during Songhai's rule, not Mali's, it underscored how the entire region had become vulnerable to external conquest due to Mali's earlier collapse. The old Mali Empire, by then a shadow of its former self, had little left to defend. The empire's political capital, Niani, once bustling with messengers, griots, and gold traders, began to lose its prestige. As power shifted east, and as loyalty to the Mansa waned, Niani fell into neglect. By the 1600s, most of Mali's former territories had declared independence, joined new kingdoms, or simply disappeared into local rule. The once mighty Mansa, whose word could once shake the Nile and decorate cities in gold, was now a regional figurehead, controlling a small sliver of territory and bearing a title with little power. The silence in the royal court was deafening. No more grand pilgrimages, no more scholars arriving from far lands, just the echo of memory. And yet, Mali did not vanish entirely. Its cities may have faded, but its stories remain preserved in the songs of griots passed from father to son, from mother to child. The epics of Sundiata, the songs of Mansa Musa, the tales of battles won and libraries built, they still live. Its manuscripts, buried during times of war, still exist, hundreds of thousands of them, tucked in family trunks, whispering ancient wisdom to those who dare to open them. Its architecture, like the Jingaba Mosque and the earthen towers of Jen, still stands weathered, but proud, and its impact echoes across generations. For even in decline, Mali had changed the world. It had reshaped trade, redefined black sovereignty, and laid the intellectual foundations for African scholarship. It had taught the world that Africa was never silent, only unheard. Mali's fall wasn't a single event. It was a combination of weak leadership after a golden era, internal divisions and rebellions, external invasions and rival powers, shifting trade routes and economic isolation, and eventually, the fading memory of greatness. But this story is not unique to Mali. Rome, Persia, the Mongol Empire, the Ottoman soul faced similar arcs. What makes Mali's story different is that so few today know it. And yet, Mali's fall teaches us more than just history. It warns us about the fragility of greatness. It reminds us that vision must be renewed, not just inherited. And it shows us that power without unity, wealth without wisdom, is destined to fade. Though the Mali Empire as a political force has long disappeared, its soul never died. You can hear it in the music of the Kora, echoing through villages. You can see it in the sand-covered manuscripts of Timbuktu. You can feel it in the pride of descendants across West Africa, who still trace their heritage to the peoples, in every king who rules wisely, in every scholar who teaches boldly, in every voice that says, Africa had kingdoms, had wealth, had brilliance. Mali lives again. The dust of time may have settled on the walls of Timbuktu. The caravans may have stopped crossing the Sahara. The voice of the Mansa may have grown silent. But the story of Mali, it still speaks, not just as a relic of the past but as a mirror to the present. The rise and fall of the Mali Empire isn't just African history. It's human history, a universal story of ambition, wisdom, innovation, and the fragile dance between power and purpose. In Mali, we see a kingdom that valued knowledge over conquest, used wealth to build, not just to consume, respected faith and tradition, while embracing new ideas, created systems of governance long before modern democracies, and preserved stories and science that still inspire us today. These aren't the tales we often hear in mainstream textbooks, but they should be, because Mali changes how we see Africa and how we see ourselves. Today, the world continues to wrestle with questions of leadership, education, and identity. And in Mali's legacy, we find some of the answers. 1. The power of visionary leadership. Mansa Musa's reign shows what's possible when leaders think beyond themselves. He built roads, schools, and systems that outlived him. Today, more than ever, we need leaders who don't just chase wealth but who invested wisely for generations to come. 2. Education as a legacy. Mali reminds us that learning is liberation, that books can outlast bullets, that libraries can shape a nation more than armies ever could. In a world struggling with misinformation, division, and shallow thinking, Mali tells us, build schools, fund knowledge, teach the truth. 3. Cultural sovereignty. Mali was proudly African, even as it engaged with the wider Islamic world. It blended the old with the new, refusing to erase its roots. In today's globalized world, Mali reminds us, we don't have to abandon who we are to grow. In West Africa, the griot tradition continues to thrive. Oral historians still carry the memory of ancient empires. Songs of Sundiata are still sung. In scholarship, the manuscripts of Timbuktu are being digitized and preserved. Thousands of them are now accessible to researchers and students worldwide. In pop culture, Mansa Musa is being rediscovered, appearing in books, podcasts, video games, and documentaries. His story has sparked new conversations about African royalty, wealth, and wisdom. In diaspora communities, the story of Mali offers a powerful reminder. Our ancestors built empires. We come from greatness. For centuries, Mali was erased or reduced to caricature. European colonizers painted Africa as a land without history. Maps removed him. Textbooks skipped over Mansa Musa. But now, the story is returning. Across classrooms, universities, and platforms like this very channel, the truth is being restored. That Africa had cities, universities, law, commerce, and kings long before the modern West. Telling Mali's story isn't just about education. It's an act of justice. It says to every African child, your history didn't start with colonization. It started with greatness. It says, to the world, Africa is not just a continent of need, it's a continent of legacy. The story of Mali leaves us with a question. What will we do with what we've been given? Mansa Musa had gold, but he built universities. He had power, but he chose pilgrimage. He had glory, but he invested in wisdom. In our own lives, our families, our communities, our nations, what will we pass on? Will we leave behind buildings, or books? Will we chase riches, or leave a legacy? Will we repeat history, or learn from it? Because empires rise and fall, but ideas live on, and truth never dies. Somewhere in the heart of the Sahel, an old griot still sings. Somewhere in a family library in Timbuktu, a dusty manuscript still whispers. Somewhere, the footsteps of scholars still echo across the desert. Mali may have fallen, but its wisdom remains. And now that you've heard its story, let it live again through you. If you were inspired by this story, here's how you can keep the legacy alive. Like this video to tell YouTube these stories matter. Subscribe to Hidden Kingdoms and Legends for more epic African history. Share this video with someone who still thinks Africa has no history. Drop a comment. What surprised you most about the Mali Empire?